much for being here today at this really special exhibition, Tracing the Unseen, Landscapes of Memory and Metaphor. It's been organized by the Atassi Foundation and Foundry. The show is open until the end of the month, so you have some time to come again and visit. My name is Rawaa Talass. I'm a journalist in Dubai, and it's a pleasure to be in conversation with a collaborator, fellow Syrian, and also the director of the Atassi Foundation. So thank you all once again for being here, and thank you, Shireen, for organizing this show. I was wondering, before we talk about the exhibition, if you want to talk a bit more about the Atassi Foundation and the origins of founding it like nearly a decade ago now.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you everyone for being here. We're excited it's a weekend. But what a better way to spend your weekend than listen to me talk. Okay, so the Atassi Foundation came about in 2014 at the height of the war in Syria. The uprising had turned into war, and the atrocities and the violence and all of that. My parents had an art collection, which they accumulated over decades. And we thought, what a better way to serve our country than to put it out there to the public, to show the true face of Syria. A face that is rooted in creativity, in culture, and beauty. But then, with time, the idea kind of evolved. My mother had been a gallerist. She actually founded and ran one of the most prominent art galleries in Syria for decades. And we thought, with her expertise and with the network that we have, you know what? No, we're going to do something a little bit more than just put a collection online or give access to it. And we're going to do a full-fledged foundation. And that's exactly what happened. In 2016, we launched in Art Dubai, which was a crazy idea actually, because we don't sell, right? So we're non-profit and we don't sell, but we wanted to launch in Art Dubai as a platform. And since then, believe it or not, it's almost our 10th anniversary next year.
Nice.
So since then, what we've been doing is we focus on exhibitions, we do publications, both online and paper publications as well. We work on digital archives, which is my baby, and we do content in terms of Arabic podcast, which is very important to us. The whole idea of the foundation is we want to create knowledge, and not just so we want to celebrate, promote, and preserve Syrian art, but we also want to create knowledge around it, because we all know Syrian art is not very widely known, so to speak.
I mean, that's something you and I have spoken about over the years, that there is this notion that maybe amongst the Arab populace, Syrian art is underrepresented, even though we have a very long history. And I wonder, why do you think that's the case? Why isn't it as well known, in your opinion?
It's true. Syrian art is underrepresented, both regionally and internationally. And I think the reasons are deeply rooted in many ways historically, but also structurally. And the reason I say that is because historically Syria has always been an isolated country, not just culturally and artistically, but also economically and politically and all sorts of things, right? So you have that historical reasoning. You have the other thing where the censorship that was imposed on artists. You have no funding for institutions in Syria. So they're really, what makes an art scene, I mean, I don't know if you want me to go into this at this point. I personally believe that the problem is really in a broken landscape, cultural landscape. It's foundational problems, right? So if you think about it, Syrian art, so there are no dedicated modern and contemporary Syrian art museums. in Syria, other than the small wings that we have in the museum, the National Museum of Damascus, Aleppo, and what have you. There are no public or private institutions that will help support the artists and develop them and their practices. There's a handful of galleries for 3-4 million, in Damascus, for instance, you have 3-4 million people, inhabitants in Damascus, a handful of art galleries, and probably a handful of collectors. So really, I think it's the foundation of what makes an art scene recognized is not there. And this is exactly what we all need to be doing, and this is the idea behind the foundation, why we wanted to promote. It's not promote as in like,
to educate. Maybe.
But we need to educate, even us as Syrians, we need to be educated, right? Us Syrians, we need to go back and figure out what the past 100 years of art means to us. There's more, but yeah, I'll drop it there.
No, and you've definitely been part of that change with all the initiatives that you've done within the past 9 years, which is incredible. Okay, let's talk about this exhibition, which I know happened quite fast. But tell me a bit more about the idea of the show and why the focus on landscape.
Yeah. So the idea of the show came up just before Eid, I think, like a day or two before Eid. The opportunity presented itself, and I was like, what the hell, I'll do it. And I did. Actually, I said yes, and we met in Rome, so like. So the idea of the exhibition, as I said, was was put together last minute. The opportunity presented itself, and we wanted to jump at it. The idea of landscapes is ancient in art history, right? Not just Syria, but everywhere else in the world. I wish we could, we wanted to have a projector for you to show you the difference of how landscape has been presented in Syrian art, but because there's so much light in the room, we thought it was going to be difficult for you to see it. So what I wanted to say is, yes, it has been an ancient theme. And in the early 20th century, you'd find the early artists of Syria kind of copied landscapes, right? So they took their easel, especially Michel Kirsch is known to have done that. And Hatta Tawfiq Tariq, so they're known to have taken their easel, they went out in nature, and they just copied nature, right? So we have in the collection a piece by Tawfiq Tariq, for instance. What I wanted to say is, landscape is not necessarily just a landscape back then, it is also a documentation. So you'll see, for instance, Tawfiq Tariq that documents the railway train that connected Beirut with Damascus, that passing through Dummar. And Dummar, at the time, it's in the midst of this pine tree forest. But Dummar today, as we all know, Dummar is totally urbanized.
Yes.
So it resembles nothing what Fitari had seen back then, so back then. Another example is a Rabway. People went out to Rabway near Damascus to, in the heat and on the banks of the Baradam river and what have you, or the castle of the citadel of Aleppo and what have you. So back then, what they did basically, so I'm just remembering all of the artworks that I could have shown, but back then, basically, they just copied the scenery, right? Beautiful. Technique with what have you. And the idea of what we're seeing today is things have moved on. There's far more to landscape than what meets the eye. Landscape here is a metaphor, it's a memory, it's an identity, it is a dream. And we'll talk more about each one of them in a bit, but yeah, so landscape is no longer just a copy of nature or a place, but it is actually far deeper than that.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, like, with these 4 works that we see here, it's no longer about a scene, but maybe it's about the artist himself. It's a mental state. It's there's something psychological about
Yeah.
that. So can you just maybe talk
Yeah.
more about the sense of feeling or melancholy in these works?
Yeah, sure. So basically, if we start,
Let's
if
do
we
you want
start,
to do a tour on
yeah,
the works?
yeah, let's do a tour of the
Yes.
of the show.
Start with
We start with Malva, Omar Hamdi, right? So it's always important for us to have a bit of context about the artist and also about the artwork, right? So the artist, Omar Hamdi, Malva, he's a Kurdish Syrian, right, from the northeast of Syria. He left Syria and moved to Lebanon for a short stint, I think. And then from there he went to Vienna in the late 70s. And even though he'd been in Vienna for such a long time, he always had this longing to his homeland, right? His works vary. So you've got the landscapes, you have the more impressionist landscapes, and you have the figuration, but you also have abstraction. Like I personally have 2 pieces of abstraction by Omar Hamdi, which I absolutely love, you know. Now, the forest, let's talk about the forest. I don't know where this forest is. We don't know, is it in Vienna, is it in Syria, is it the banks of a river, is it, but the pure silence, I want to say, like it's almost like you only hear the sound of the leaves moving with it. So this is something, this is not necessarily a forest that he's been to. It's just, you know, it's a beauty, right? Farouk Kandakshi behind me. Farouk is a Hamsi artist, like me. And he's always been a master of color, I would say. This is called the Field of Dreams, and it was done in 2020. It's not necessarily a place that he visited or a memory, but it's more of a dream of some beauty that could come back to his homeland, right? As a fellow Hamsi, I can see the landscape being on the outskirts of Homs on the way to Clark the Chevalier, where in spring, there's always those wild flowers that just spring out, and the meadows are just like really expansive, right? But maybe not, you know. So is it a memory? Is it a dream? Is it in between? And you know, the sheer size of it makes you feel that you're in it.
Yes.
You're actually there.
You're immersed
In it, right? Walid al-Masri is a Syrian artist who's based in Paris. And this is from his Cocoon series. And Walid does a lot of repetition of the series. And he thinks that every time he repeats, the repetition forces him to reconsider or to perceive the subject slightly differently. So the cocoon is actually a metaphor of the future of Syria and how it's going to be, you know, like the butterfly when it comes out of its cocoon. So he's looking for the beauty, for the hope that will, you know, that will transpire in Syria. And lastly, Rawaa Talass, also from Homs. Rida is, like, how do we explain Rida? Rida is the most tender, kind, poetic person. And this landscape, again, you can see not just the geometric, but it's almost like a summary of the actual scene of the landscape. He's also from Homs, so again, I personally can see the beauty of the expanses of the, you know, the spaces around Homs in the area. But he's not necessarily copying a place per se here. I mean, what space, it looks so summarized, right?
Yeah. No, they're very beautiful works, and there's something, I think, emotional about them. And there's maybe a sense of longing. all of these artists, I think they didn't live in Syria at some point. So would you say that they're longing for home or a feeling? Would you say
there's a longing, there's a dream, there's an identity, there is a perception, there's a lot of things. It's layered. I would say it's layered. You know. So for instance, both Rida and Omar have left us. They passed, but specifically when we talk about Rida is, I mean, when you know the person and the history, it just kind of puts the works in different context and perspective, right? So I was going to say something about Rida, and now it's past. I forgot what I was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that for you, this is a very personal show because you knew these artists.
Yeah.
And you grew up in that environment. You even knew Malva when you were younger.
Yeah.
And all of these artists struggled in several ways because of what's been happening in our country. And I was wondering, since you're close to that community, not just these artists, but Syrian artists at large, do you just want to talk about some of the difficulties that Syrian artists have gone through that you feel should be highlighted?
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty of where do we stop and where do we start, and where, the difficulty is not just the personal loss, it's not only the war, the destruction, but it's in the fact it's multi-layered, I would say. I mean, we spoke about a broken system.
Yeah.
And that by itself is a big challenge for all of them. This is a major difficulty. How do you go beyond the boundaries of your country, right? So I would say, like today, before the fall of Assad or during the rule of the Assad regime, I would say, the broken foundational landscape was a big challenge. And I'm not going to talk again of the war atrocities and all of that because this goes beyond speaking about. But I would say isolation is a major problem. So Syrian artists in Syria are isolated from the world, and those in diaspora are also isolated from their audiences and from their context, the Syrian context, right? Another big problem that I think has been faced and is a systemic, has been like really pressing, is the way that Syrian art has been framed. It's framed as a political statement, not as an artistic production, which flattens the depth, especially all those grant-making organizations. They always, during the war, Syrian art was so like everyone, there was a lot of scrutiny on Syrian art and Syrian artists and what have you. But, focusing and requesting them to be talking of the loss of the diaspora, of the displacement, of the war and destruction, it just frames them as political statement people and not as artists. And that flattens their practices. The depths, it takes away from the depths of that. Now, since the fall of the regime, that's a whole different ballgame, because I think.
Are you hopeful about it, maybe? Or
I'm cautiously hopeful. I don't know what to make out of it. I think in the absence of strong cultural strategies, not much is going to come out. I don't know how much the current administration is really serious about arts and culture. I mean, we saw what happened in Halab 2 days ago, right? So, with the destruction of sculpture and Saad al-Jabri's. So, where does that take us, and how do we make sure that art is no longer just another thing or like a luxury? How do we make sure that art becomes part of our identity and part of who we are? And how do we take, how do we take art from nukhbe, the elite, right? And bring it down to everyday's life. How do we make sure that kids in schools actually go to an art museum and experience that? I mean, this is a major, I think this is a major problem. The absence of such cultural strategies is a nightmare. It's going to be detrimental. And look at the Gulf. Look at what the GCC countries have done with not just coherent in their domestically, like the UAE, they have very clear institutions, both public and private. They fund, they promote, they help the artists develop, they help them go to residencies, they have the museums, and within the museums there's the different roles of each of the emirates. I mean, I can go endlessly on how wonderful the strategic outlook of the UAE and Qatar and Saudi is. But in the absence of such strategies in Syria, I don't think we have much hope. Hopefully we will. It's not that I don't have much hope, but I think this is a role that all of us have to play, right? So we can't just sit here and expect the new administration to just turn around and say, oh, we're going to have a cultural strategy. Well, we need to, you know, over the past 15 years, there are Syrian skills around the world, whether it's a professional, deeply knowledgeable, and really very nationalistic, I would say, like deeply loves, those people deeply love where they come from and they're quite proud. So it's a matter of putting our hands together and just figuring out how we're going to do that. I think I went on a tangent.
No, that's
Yeah. I think it's really important.
I think the victim-to-victor mentality is a personal choice.
Absolutely.
And that has to be instilled. I'm so sorry, I'm taking
No, please.
because I think that.
I mean, this is a small group, so we can, like, we don't have to go through question and answer, but we can all.
I mean, I'm originally from Pakistan, and I guess curiosity is one thing that has to be instilled through contemporary art.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of just, you know, personal sort of improvement, and that intellect has to be instilled through education, through, like you said, you know, artists having the freedom to investigate into not something which is very commercial. Like this is not commercial at all. This is actually investigating your inner world.
Yeah.
You know, creating greenscape, like beautiful pieces of work. I'm so tired of looking at war-stricken images.
Yeah.
Because we need some level of beauty and hope to engage those sort of nervous systems back to intellect.
Yeah.
And how do we do that?
Yeah.
We only do that by having a little bit of hope that is left in our being.
Yeah.
I mean, when I meet up with other nationalities, we all at the human level are so similar.
Yeah.
There's not much different except for language, the way we are brought up. And I think tribal, we have to go back. Modernity has done that. It has stolen away our sort of, you know, authentic voices. But we all come from these tribal wisdoms and knowledge which has to be embraced.
Yeah.
Why I'm here? Because I'm learning through you what Syria's history is. I know the superficial news that I have engaged myself through, you know, learning the political background. But who are the people in Syria?
Yeah,
So, you know, this is.
I mean, I totally agree, but you have to remember also art does not sit in a vacuum. It does not exist in a vacuum, right? So the realities are dire. People are, you know, living really tough circumstances. So what does an artist do? I mean, it's always multi-layered. Even if you do like a nude, there has to be a nuance that takes you back to reality, right? But look at this. This is beauty, as you said. It's not all doom and gloom, and the hope is there.
Thank you so much. Lovely, sort of, you know, sharing those beautiful art pieces with us. The main thing, the way I look at it here now as a global country, there are so many priorities that needs to be established and addressed before you can address art. What I think is very important is what you're doing. Posting the art scene outside of Syria until it's ready and mature enough to be transported back to Syria. I think, you know, something like that, Atassi Foundation,
any other, when us Syrians who buy Syrian artists and collect Syrian artists, to give our Syrian artists a chance to support them, so one day they can be strong enough and that art can be transported back to Syria and they at least keep the name going. Because despite the fact that the country has been really through so much, and I wouldn't say in the past 10 years, it's been over 50 years. So it hasn't been only that short period of time. Despite that, great artists has been really Syrian artists that share the community. Like Mama, he left Syria in the long time ago, and now he proved himself to be one of the fastest Syrian artists, Syrian artists. So we just have to keep it going until it's ready to take it back.
I mean, I totally agree with you. Everything needs time, right? So you can't just wake up in the morning and decide, this is going to be an art scene that is flourishing, that we have Syrian collectors and people. But let's think about the past 15 years since the uprising of the war. 15 generations of artists graduated from the Academy of Fine Arts in Damascus, and I'm not considering the one who did Portland. Where are they? Where are they? So nothing becomes. It's not an on and off button, but we all have a responsibility. And even the foundation actually was set up with that feeling, that sense of responsibility to say, hey guys, none of that represented us. None of that is actually who I am, or my family is, or who you are and your family are. We are different. This is the true face of Syria. This is who we are. This is who we relate to. But you can't do it overnight. I mean, we need to be doing, each of us in our own little respect, what we need to do. And it's a process. It's a process. And you know what? I also think it's only been, 7 months? Can we just wake up from that shock and actually take time to think? So I was told, I don't know if I should be talking about this, but I am going to. So I was told, someone said, so what's the Atassi Foundation waiting for? Why aren't they in Damascus yet? Okay, I was told, I've been told that, right? And my answer was, I understand, we need to be in Damascus, but I don't want to be doing tactful, quick decisions. So what am I going to do in Damascus? I need to reimagine my role in Damascus. My role has been outside of Syria. And I'm sorry, I'm talking about Damascus as a Syria, but not specifically Damascus, because my family thinks the connection needs to go back to Damascus. But I don't want, we need to rethink our roles. We need to think, what does Syria mean
And is it safe
now?
enough?
And what does it need now?
And is it safe enough?
Is it safe enough to be back? Not just safe, I mean, look at what's going on. I think we all need to take a breath and there's a lot of noise with everything, whether it's the Hawiyya al-Basariyya that I went up with yesterday, 2 days ago. There's so much noise. And can people just take a breath and really consider deeply what the purpose is and really move strategically, not tactfully? I think it's very important. Sorry, Captain.
You needed to know what role will the Atassi Foundation will play, depending on which cultural context and which cultural strategy, which we don't know yet.
I don't know if I can register a foundation. Right? So we don't know if we can register a foundation. I'm not about to register a commercial entity. If I have to, I have to. But I don't think it's that way now. We don't know what the needs are. Do they need a museum? Do we need an art gallery? Do I need to exist there as a collector because they need money, and as a funder, as a what? What is my role?
Exactly.
صح؟ يعني let's just
The
be
picture is not
pragmatic.
clear
We
yet.
need to be pragmatic, and since we're building from the bottom up, let's think of what we're doing.
I agree with everything that's been said, and as someone who just recently visited Halab and Damascus, I can tell you, I think there are two different populations of Syrians. Those who are living abroad, especially in the Gulf area, and those who are living in Syria. the ones who are living in Syria are unfortunately under maybe 9. Yeah. So they're really, unfortunately, not thinking about art. If you go to Syria now and tell them I want to register an art gallery or something, they're like, are you kidding me? We need so many other things before we go there. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about it and you know, maybe rally the troops over there who are able to actually understand the mission. That's one point I want to, you know, exactly what to your point. Take a breath, let the country actually revive itself a little bit while we are getting ourselves ready here to actually transport things and transport the knowledge and things that we have learned in this country. The other thing I wanted to also comment about is your comment, you're mentioning the UAE as a great place, and it is. I think nobody will argue about the fact that we have been very blessed to have a country like UAE that supports arts and all of that. But if we also take a look back and see, have they actually from the beginning started doing this from 1971 when they actually know? So because they were building their country first, and then with that came a lot of cultural initiatives and foundations and things that. So once they've put together the foundation of a good, strong country, they now started with education and artistic things. So I think we are in the very, very early stages of rebuilding our country.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll follow them.
But can I just say,
Add something to this?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm so glad you brought it up. From comparison between UAE and Syria. So I mean, my country, I'm from Pakistan. I would consider we have many challenges, and I'll share you something very personal as an experience on the ground, which really I remember I was so touched by it. So I was visiting Lahore, and I went to a museum with a friend of mine. It was during Lahore Biennale. And there was this gentleman across from me who was clearly, a craftsman who had brought his son. So he was trying to read through the, English sort of labels that we never think that, not everybody can read in English. And so I walked up to him and I said, let me help you. So he was a carpenter. He had told his son to come from the village, who was 17-year-old, and he had brought his son to the museum. And their plan was that they will go after that to have lunch somewhere in a garden. And so I asked him, I said, why would you bring your son here? He said, because I want my son to see the world, away from what we live every day.
yeah,
That is the importance of art. So people who can make difference should really find any sort of means to push for it. I mean, starting from collectors, I think we don't give enough importance to teachers, professors, who actually put that sort of, why do I sometimes do things? I always look back and I give full credit to my professors and teachers. The importance of art lies in everyone's hands, even like a person who's sitting next to me, if you can part that sort of,
absolutely.
So there
I
are
think
so many
it can
ways.
act as a cement that brings us
And
together.
I'm so glad you brought it up.
It has to
What
go
Gabriel said.
parallel.
They have to wait
Yeah.
So
until
you
the
don't have to
conflict
have a
is
strategic plan. Sometimes things in chaos can also ask you to do more than what maybe you are built to do. Yeah.
The counter argument could be, no, this is exactly when we need arts and culture to bring us together. It's
We need to build
we need to build it in
the
parallel because it really cements the society. It doesn't matter if you're this or that. It doesn't. We don't come with labels on each one of us, right? And we shouldn't be coming with labels on each one of us. And maybe art, other than food, but maybe art is the way, culture is the way, film, literature.
It's a different kind of feeding the person
Yeah.
and creating a new person coming out of this war from
Yeah.
destruction. You need to give people hope, to give them tools
Absolutely.
to express themselves, not only artists, even young kids at school, a way to
Yeah, it's a
express the
solution, yeah.
traumas they've been through, teach them how to take all this darkness inside them out. And I think
You cannot wait until economy gets well
No.
and things get well to have art.
Yeah.
Because
لا بس
art
هلا I
is
think
part of
what he means
everything.
what he means is there are
Priorities,
priorities for everyday life, and I totally agree. But one does not negate
School
the other.
system has to
Yeah.
go with it.
Engage. That's
Yeah.
another very important point. We can just sit here and say, they have to do it, they have
Yeah,
to give us
exactly.
the so we have to engage.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to go down the conversation, but coming from a fellow country which is currently not in a very good place, I feel like sometimes we in the art world, and I've been in the art world for a long time, we come from a place of privilege.
Oh, yeah.
To what the gentleman was saying. There are so many priorities. For us as a diaspora, it's important. It's a way for us to connect with our culture and to engage with it, to understand the context. For the people on the ground,
It's a different
how do
reality.
we come to this not from a place of privilege? It feels really privileged for us to be sitting.
But it's not only in our region, right? It's not only in our region. Art is very elitist. You go to art galleries and you read the text, and I'm not quite stupid. I don't consider myself stupid, but I don't understand. So how elitist is that? If I'm reading a stupid text, I can't understand.
Yeah.
It is elitist everywhere.
But I think particularly in context of war
Yeah.
and depravity
Yeah.
and atrocities, etc.
Yeah.
This might be pretty to look at, but it's a huge privilege for us to be sitting in this
Oh my
room
gosh, yeah.
talking about it. So how would you recommend that we can go into these places, like Syria or Palestine eventually, coming in a way that doesn't feel like, oh, I'm this.
Yes, and maybe this is one of the things that we all need to be considering. Right? Maybe I don't think I would have the answer, or or we in this room would have the answer. But
just
this is
think it's something to think about.
This is something that we need to think about, and this is why I was saying before we go and jump and say I'm going back. Let's consider really consider what is needed. And what is needed is to, if we're saying what is needed is to bring art to the normal, everyday life, then I'll tell you the first thing you need to do is go back to education systems, right? You need to go back to museums. You need to instill a stroke of how you go to a museum and you respect the space of the museum, and this is the bare minimum, right?
It is all about.
It's not just about the artwork itself, right? So if I have a child, I want them to respect the art, respect the museum, respect the people in the museum, actually see the value of being part of that
Which my
ecosystem.
point means that they need to be able to go to school safely
Yeah.
and in an environment where they're allowed to speak and critique and think.
Yeah.
And those are the basics
Yeah.
first
Yeah,
before we even get into it.
I think we're all coming from, troubled region, unfortunately, but, and I understand definitely, there are, I can't predict, there are priorities and we all recognize them. But I think it's also part of our collective narrative to preserve this aspect, the artistic aspect. Yes, it's not a priority anymore, the priority is for rebuilding, the priority is for the people's welfare, for the health and the rebuilding of our countries and our societies. But this is also part of our narrative, and not to be reduced only to wars and to destruction and to victims.
And this is because this is how we've been
portrayed.
We've been framed as such for such a long time.
Exactly.
And if we change that narrative, and we change the way we think of ourselves from being the victim of those systems, the victim of the regional powers, the victims of that. Yeah, again, it's not an on and off, it's not one answer that can be given.
It's a process.
It's an open discussion, but the discussion by itself is super important. The fact that we have realized that by itself is something. Right.
Any more questions or comments? Thank you all. I really love how this became a conversation. Yeah,
I love it, I'm so glad.
less is more. Less is more, right? Yeah. No, and I was going. That was my last question for you. That there's something really refreshing about these works. The color palette, the smoothness. There's also like beauty, and as we've said, the Syrian art over the past 10, 15 years has been marked by brutality and war, and so these works defy that
Yeah,
preconceived
that's
notion.
right.
Well, thank you, Shireen. Thank you for organizing.
Thank you everyone
And
for coming
thank you
on
all for being
Saturday.
here. We really appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so
nice.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.